Here are the solutions to week 2's problem set. The histogram below shows the percentage of income spent on housing by populations of a sample of developed countries. Use the histogram to answer the following questions. How many countries were surveyed? So in this histogram, you can see that on top of every box in the histogram, it tells you how many countries were in that box. You could also use the scale on the y-axis to determine how high each bar was if those numbers weren't there. But to answer A, all we have to do is add up those frequencies. So 1 plus 1 plus 8 plus 12 plus 9 plus 4 plus 3. Altogether, that gives us a total of 38. So there were 38 countries surveyed. In what percent of the countries surveyed did people spend more than 20% of their income on housing? So if you look at the axis here, these are the bars that spent more than 20% on their housing. And so let's go ahead and take a look at our data. So the countries that spent more than 38% of their income on housing were these bars right here. And so if we add those up, that's 12 plus 9 plus 4 plus 3. And let's do that for a moment. That gives us a total of 28. Now we have to be careful because the problem asked us to make that into a percent of the countries. So it's 28 out of 38 countries. And to change that to a percent, we simply multiply it by 100%. So you do that using a calculator. So 28 divided by 38 times 100% gives us 73.684, and then there's some more numbers, but usually we just round it off to 1 decimal point. And so that would be 73.7%. What is the shape of this histogram? Well, if we look at the shape of this histogram, if you can imagine just kind of draping a string over it, it would look kind of like that. And so we can see that the highest part of the histogram isn't in the middle, it's off to one side, and so we know that this is skewed. And you might remember from the guided notes, the way you can tell the difference between skewed left and skewed right is to think about the toes on your feet. So if you think about the shape, does this shape that we're looking at resemble more your left foot toes or your right foot toes? Well, if you think about that, it looks more like your left foot. So this graph is skewed left. All right, let's move on to the second one. A student collects data on the astrological signs of a sample of his friends. Could he use a dot plot to graph this data? Why or why not? So one of the things that's really important from this section is to know what kind of graphs you can use for what kind of data. So a dot plot can only be used if you have numerical data. And so you have to ask yourself, if we're looking at astrological signs, is that numerical? Well, if someone asked you, what's your astrological sign, you would say something like Aries or Taurus or whatever your astrological sign may be. Notice that this is a category. So astrological sign is a categorical variable. And since it's a categorical variable, can you use a dot plot? No. Why? Because astrological sign is a categorical variable, and dot plots are only used for numerical variables. Next one. A student collects data on the amount of time spent online daily by a sample of middle school students. Name 2 graphs she could use to display her data. Now notice this graph, if we think about the variable amount of time, if you ask someone, how many minutes did you spend doing something? The answer they're going to give you is a number. So this is a numerical variable. And with a numerical variable, the 2 types of graphs you can use are dot plots or a histogram. So again, the type of graph always depends on the type of variable. Next, the histograms below show the number of calories in a sample of Kellogg's cereal, abbreviated K, and Nabisco cereals, abbreviated N. Which manufacturer tends to have cereals containing more calories? So if you look at the graphs here, notice that this is K, so this is Kellogg's. And here we have Nabisco. And if you look at the Nabisco graph, it's mostly between 80 to 100, but if you look at the Kellogg's graph, it goes well past 100, and so Kellogg's contains more calories. And again, the way we know that is by looking at the numbers on the calories axis and noticing that the Kellogg's one have data much higher than the Nabisco one. What manufacturer has more variability in the number of calories, and how do you know this from the histogram? So remember, variability is a measure of spread. So what you're looking for is lots of numbers or lots of data values that are spread out. So if you look at these two graphs, notice that Kellogg's goes from 50 to well past 150, and most of the variable data values go between somewhere below 100 to 150, whereas Nabisco is pretty much concentrated right into this little span right here of about 70 to 110. So hopefully you can see that this graph here for Kellogg's has more variability because the data values are more spread out. Name another type of graph that could be used to display this data. So again, this data is about number of calories, and you have to ask yourself, is this numerical or categorical? Number of calories is definitely numerical. And with numerical data, again, the two graphs that you can use are dot plots or histograms. So what I'd like you to do is assess yourself on each of the questions, how well you think you understood each of the questions on this problem set. Remember, it's a scale of 1 to 5, and you can find the rubric on Canvas. And upload your scale, upload your score sheet to Canvas, and you'll get full credit for this assignment.